Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, channeling my inner dancing queen, Steve, was he taking the mickey, having a go at Theresa May?
Well, it looks like he was taking the mickey, doesn't it? Yeah, it's unfortunate because it comes hard on the heels of Donald Tusk and the cherries on the cake, and then Donald Tusk saying that we all needed to be respectful, so it is rather unfortunate.
You don't think it was just a joke?
Well, of course, and, you know, jokes are OK. You mentioned the Tarantino movie joke.
Yeah.
But, you know, I do think it's important to be light-hearted, but, you know, in such serious circumstances, I think being seen to mock a Prime Minister is not where we should be.
All right. What message would you have, then, for Jean-Claude Juncker?
That we want to comply with Lisbon Treaty Article 8 and live in an area of friendship and prosperity together, and that means we should conclude a deal, and let's just work towards that.
Is he having a sense of humour loss here, Lucy?
Me?
Yes.
Well, I mean, actually, I don't know that Europe have really done themselves a great deal of favour over the last sort of few weeks. I think they've looked a little bit too truculent. To be fair, we want a deal. We need to get that deal, and yes, I knew this was going to be difficult, but I think they're being a little bit disrespectful, and I don't think that's going to help in the long run.
Do you agree, or do you think Jean-Claude Juncker... You want to defend Jean-Claude Juncker and his dancing?
I think we should all just chill, really. I mean, all he did was do a wee wobble, and
Was it a wee wobble?
It was a wee wobble, and it was kind of cute, and it didn't do anybody any harm. And, you know, well, thank goodness nobody in the Tory party mocks the Prime Minister, eh?
Yeah. Well, we might be coming on to that in just a moment, because Mark Harper, he's the former Chief Whip, he's been writing in the Daily Telegraph today and says that Theresa May will never get her Chequers deal through Parliament and needs to chuck it. He says a Canada-style deal is the only one that can unite Conservative and DUP MPs. Kate Devon, walk us through the numbers. Is he right?
Well, this is the big question. And certainly there are lots of people, and Steve is one of them, who argue that there are 40 Tory MPs willing to vote against Chequers. At the same time, it has to be said there is a bit of a confidence in Number 10 that they will get this deal through. Whether this is a misplaced confidence or not is very hard to tell. But it's there, it does exist, and it is kind of noticeable. You did see it at Tory party conference last week, which is possibly why there is a kind of renewed campaign to try and get the Prime Minister to chuck Chequers this week.
Right. Well, of course, there have been a couple of cabinet ministers we haven't actually heard from in terms of whether they support Chequers or not. One of them is Penny Mordaunt, the International Development Secretary, but she has been talking this morning. Let's have a listen.
The Prime Minister can count on my support, but what I would say is that we don't know where this is going to end up. I mean, we're at a critical moment now. The issue currently is that the ball is firmly back in the EU's court. We are waiting for them to respond.
What's your response to that?
Well, Penny's a person with a great deal of vision, and I think she's absolutely right that the ball is in the EU's court. What I would say is with this, I agree with Mark Harper, he's a very skillful and acute observer of other politicians, as you'd expect. But it's not really going to matter what the future statement says about Chequers if the backstop puts us indefinitely in the single market and the customs union. And there's a danger of that. And really, all of us, including Penny, will be waiting to see what the details actually are that the Prime Minister brings.
I mean, do you think that Penny Mordaunt's support is conditional?
Well, I think for any member of the government, there's always likely to be a point on any particular policy where they can't support it. But, you know, somebody said to me, you wait 20 years for a resignation on principle and then 3 come along at once. So, you know, usually people find a way to accommodate it. The Conservative Party's a broad church. But I think that Penny has a very clear idea of what she wants out of our exit from the EU. And I think she's right to do what she's done today, which is to point out that the ball is in the EU's court. Right.
Well, let's talk a little more about the numbers and whether Number 10 does have the support to get the Chequers deal through. As Kate said, they think they do. I mean, you once talked about 80 Conservative MPs willing to vote against Chequers. Now it's 40. What happened?
It's not quite like that. The situation is, as I've put on the record in different places, at the time we had amendments where we could vote in protest on amendments on Chequers. The number was almost 80 who were willing to vote that way. But as I've said on air previously, that voting on amendments to legislation is a relatively low bar. On the high bar of this meaningful vote, my estimate is that the absolute irreducible core of colleagues who will not support a Chequers-based end state is 40 to 45. But, you know, of course, this is a fluid situation, and I'm glad I've got a reputation for not exaggerating the numbers.
Right, but are you saying that really 40 of your colleagues are going to be willing, like you, to defeat their own government on the biggest project they're pursuing?
Well, we have got form on it, I'm afraid. I mean, many of us are in politics because we believe in some things. And when you believe in something and you're willing to stand for it, you know, giving fair warning that you're going to stand for it and then doing so, I think is probably one of the ways that politics ought to work. We've all got to compromise, but the public voted to leave and were the backstop to include indefinite internal market and customs union membership. Obviously, we couldn't support it.
Right, so you would be willing to risk bringing down your own government?
Well, no, that's a red herring. The Fixed Term Parliament Act requires 2/3 support in the House of Commons to trigger a general election, or for it to go through on the nod, a motion to go through on the nod. So it absolutely does not follow from the meaningful vote on the deal that there would be a general election. It simply doesn't follow.
I mean, one of the things that will help Theresa May get her Chequers plan through, or something close to it, is the support of Labour MPs. Will you back the Chequers plan?
No, not in its current form. I mean, I know my name was associated with this recently, but I've had no conversations with anyone from government, and nor would I. I mean, I think actually Jeremy Corbyn made a very generous offer in his conference speech, and he said that we will support her plan if it meets our tests. And I don't think those tests are that difficult to meet, because they are tests that Theresa May herself, and in fact the Brexiteers and the Tory party, set out in the run-up to and in the aftermath of the referendum. And it really is we are in a mess now, aren't we? And really,
But you voting against the deal that comes back will result possibly in no deal and the UK leaving without a deal. Would that be a mess too, in your mind?
Well, let's see what comes back. But I'm clear, as are the vast majority of Labour MPs, that we want a deal that protects jobs, that protects the livelihoods of my constituents, because it will be the poorest in society who pay the heaviest
So
price.
do you think the vast majority of Labour MPs will not back Theresa May's plan, despite reports that say actually up to 25 might?
I don't think the vast majority of Labour MPs will do, but let's see what comes back. I think it's a real disappointment that the government haven't used this opportunity to try and build a national consensus. Jeremy Corbyn made a very generous offer at conference. There is a parliamentary majority for keeping us in a customs union that secures jobs and livelihoods across the country, and we should have gone for that instead of being, you know, in hock to these 40, 45 irreducible core of people who want to play Russian roulette with the livelihoods and the jobs of some of my constituents.
Is that what you're doing?
Go for a hard Brexit?
No, of course it's not true. The situation is that a customs union doesn't achieve the free circulation of goods unless it's combined in some way with membership of the internal market. So as soon as you say we want to be in the customs union for the free circulation of goods, that really means you've overturned the result, because you must know it means internal market membership. And if once you're in the internal market, it's free movement of people, it's the whole shebang that's indivisible. So
no, that's not the case at all.
Yeah,
that's not the case.
Absolutely.
And do you know what? I used to be the director of Britain in Europe long ago, when we were having these arguments. Yeah, in the previous life, sort of 15 years ago. And all the Brexiteers then used to say, we want the Norway model. That's what they used to argue for then. And what they spent the referendum arguing for was the exact same benefits, but with all these extra freedoms. And now they don't even want the exact same benefits. But, you know, they've all left the park now.
But all the parties, including the SNP, are now saying that they're going to vote against anything that Theresa May brings back.
Well, I think the SNP has said. I mean, obviously, I don't hold a position in the party.
No, I see your party.
I work as a journalist, but I was an SNP MP, as you know. I think what the party said is that it's going to wait and see what happens, what Theresa May delivers.
But it's not going to be one in the single market or the customs union.
No, of course it's not. And sadly, the First Minister has said that what's best for Scotland, and I think what's best for the UK as a whole, is membership of the customs union and single market.
Is this constructive, though? You know, we're hearing from Steve Baker, Lucy and John, all of them saying they're going to go and vote against Theresa May's deal. What will that lead to?
Well, I think one of the interesting things is the arguments that Lucy is making to Steve are going to be the arguments the number 10 make to Lucy. They're going to say it's about jobs and prosperity. They're going to say it's about you can choose not to have a no deal. And they're going to point out exactly how many jobs in each constituency. Well, so when it comes to the pinch point, the arguments that people are making against their opponents at the minute are going to be turned on themselves. Now, whether this works or not, you know, is not really for me to say, but it is what's going to happen.
What pressure can you bring to bear on Theresa May to chuck Chequers?
Well, at the moment, the situation is we've just made absolutely clear, as I have done today, that there are large numbers of colleagues who don't support that end state or indeed the backstop that I've outlined. And so actually just making it plain what the situation is gives people the opportunity to make an informed decision. And we're not really in the business of further sabre rattling now. We need to see exactly what the details are, but no one should be under any illusions that there are a large number of Tory MPs who don't want a sort of, as one, I would call it, to be in a state of being a regulatory satellite rather than the vassal state.
Fine, but there's nothing else you can do, is there? There's nothing else that you can actually mechanistically do to force her hand.
But that she is the Prime Minister and she has power, and people respect that. You heard Penny supporting the Prime Minister. But obviously, everybody knows what the mechanisms are that are in place. But we're not in the business of threatening the person of the Prime Minister. We've said throughout this period, since I and Boris and David resigned, that we wanted to change the policy and not the person. And we still insist that that would be the right thing for the country.
Right, but we are at a point where the only way to change that policy, and you just said earlier on in this discussion that it is so important to you that you will do anything, you'll defeat your own government on it. Isn't this the point at which you call for a change of leader in order to get that change of policy?
No, well, that's the thing that every journalist has been trying to get us to do for weeks. So I'm not going to sit here today and do it.
Because people don't understand how you're going to get to your end point of changing the policy.
Well, we very clearly set out how to break this impasse. The ERG put out a paper showing how to solve the problems of Northern Ireland. I noticed today on LinkedIn one of my colleagues picked up a former DG of the Border Force in the UK saying that the problems of the Irish border can be solved without changing the physical infrastructure. People can read the argument by picking it up off my Twitter feed. So we can unlock the prison into which these negotiations have fallen on the Irish border and go on and have a good quality.
Isn't it funny how loyal Tory MPs always are to their leaders in public until they defenestrate them in the most aggressive way possible? It's all history of the Tory party. I've watched this for years. The journalists are always blamed. You're trying to stir up trouble. You're trying to mix it. It's about policies, not personalities, to borrow a Bennism for a moment. But they gossip about this stuff endlessly. Everybody knows they do. And they have no respect for Theresa May whatsoever. And she's, to use that old cliché, in office but scarcely in power. It's a sad and sorry story.
I take issue with that, actually. I mean, I think Theresa... Well,
you don't talk to your colleagues and gossip about leadership?
There are many colleagues who engage in a lot of gossip. Personally, I try not to. But in terms of the point of respect, I've got a great deal of respect for Theresa May. She's a deeply dutiful person who obviously cares very much for our country. I just happen to think that on the Chequers proposals, it's the wrong trajectory for the country. It's a kind of... rearguard action trying to avoid anything changing. But, our party includes some people who are old Tories, they don't like change, and some people like me are old English liberals who are quite comfortable with change. And sometimes we end up butting heads, and I think that's what's going on at the moment. Now, I want to see dramatic change in the worldwide trading system to make it more liberal and freer.
All right.
And I think the UK has a role to play in doing that, which it can't do if Chequers goes through.
I mean, but it's true then that the ERG, the group of which you are a part of, the European Research Group, has got all bark but no bite in this.
Well, no, that's not true. So if you look back to the 3 years I've been involved with these things, we've voted, we've defeated governments on repeatedly. We had an amendment go through on the Queen's speech at one point. We amended a finance bill. We've defeated governments repeatedly. So, we are prepared to do it.
Like when you were a minister?
Well, when I was a minister, of course, I was a minister.
You were doing that behind the scenes when you were a minister,
No, of course not. Lots of people...
Defeating your own budget, your own Queen's speech.
We didn't do that, of course, while I was a minister.
Oh.
That was during the course of the campaign. But, people who want to know about what I have and haven't done can read it about in various books, and that's something I'm surprised by even now. But as a minister, I got on with doing my duty. I think generally people would say I was scrupulous in making sure I abided by the collective responsibility I shared.
You have left the scene. I mean, you, Boris Johnson, David Davis, you completely left the scene at the crucial juncture.
Completely left the scene. I don't think anybody's
Well, you've left government.
You've left the power of actually changing.
I don't think anybody's going to
say
seriously sustain the argument. I've left the scene of having the debate on the European Union, our future as a nation.
No, it's not the debate.
All right, just one final thing. One final thing before we move on. Jacob Rees-Mogg said in August that it would be very dangerous if the government had to rely on Labour votes like Lucy Powell's. What did he mean?
it's always dangerous for a government to rely on the opposition. They are, after all, the opposition. It's their job to oppose. And I think it's a sad state to get to, that you're counting on people whose job it is to defeat you to support your business.
Although you didn't mind Labour leavers coming on board with you to defeat the government.
I'd also say it's pretty dangerous to rely on this rump of 40 to take us down a hard Brexit road.
There's no need to be disobliging about it. There's a large number of colleagues who've got strong views about the EU, and you might remember that during the referendum campaign, something over 130 Conservative MPs were for leave, even when that was a rebellion.
And of course, you've always got the DUP, that beacon of progressive politics. You, as an old English Liberal, must be deeply proud that you can rely on them for votes after the massive financial bong.
Right, just finally, Kate.
They were elected as MPs by people from my constituency. See absolutely nothing wrong with them exercising their rights. And also, it's a bit hypocritical for you to want Steve not to be. You accuse Steve of not being loyal to the Prime Minister, but you don't want him to be loyal to the Brexit he campaigned for and the Brexit he believes in.
But the Brexit that they campaigned for was so incredibly vague. Didn't talk about any of this level of detail.
The Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab has told MPs he's confident of reaching a deal with the EU in the coming months and said the government should hold its nerve. It comes as Theresa May faces growing calls from within her own party and from the opposition to change course as the government embarks on the final stages of negotiations. Our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, reports.
Who is backing Mrs May's plan for Brexit?
Are you facing Brexit mutiny, Mr Gove?
The Cabinet's behind her, at least in public, at least for now.
Will we get a Brexit deal next week?
But keeping Tory discipline's a bit like herding cats. It's almost as if time's speeding up ahead of Brexit Day.
These negotiations, Mr Speaker, are always bound to be tough in the final stretch. That's all the more reason why we should hold our nerve, stay resolute and focused, and I remain confident we will reach a deal this autumn. Because it is still in the best interests of the UK and the European Union.
No government has the right to plunge the country into chaos as a result of its own failure. Time is running out, but there's still time to change course, and I urge the Secretary of State to do so. Thank you.
Tory splits run deep. A former minister warning today the PM's plans could mean dire consequences, election defeat. And amid the splits in Parliament, Brexiteers say they can and will defeat their own government.
I'm absolutely confident that there are at least 40 to 45 colleagues willing, in the last ditch, to vote down that non-compromise of a half-in, half-out Brexit. If we end up with the EU in the long-term position of deciding when we can become self-governing, then I would expect more resignations.
And what about the higher ranks? How strong's the strain in the Cabinet? Today, one Brexit minister was careful about what she said and what she didn't.
Have you ever, and did you ever contemplate resigning over the Prime Minister's Brexit compromise?
I think that we need to let the Prime Minister and her negotiating team get on with it, and I'm supporting her in doing that.
But for how long was her backing guaranteed?
Well, the Prime Minister can count on my support, but what I would say is that we don't know where this is going to end up.
So not quite loyalty come what may, and so far there's still a deadlock in Brussels. The EU's chief negotiator met Ulster's Democratic Unionist today. He's rejected Mrs May's compromise, sticking by common rules for trade in goods, though he'd accept special treatment for Northern Ireland to avoid an Irish border. The Democratic Unionists have closed the door on special treatment as a threat to the Union.
I am a unionist. I believe in the union of the United Kingdom. But what happens in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? We do not want Northern Ireland going off in a different direction from the rest of the UK, and that, to me, is fundamental.
In the end, it'll be settled here. Another European summit next week, then another next month. And if there is a deal, a reckoning in Parliament, where both main parties could split and every vote could count. It's looking like a cliffhanger, inevitably as winter follows autumn. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, Brexit negotiations ramped up a stage today with the EU chief negotiator meeting the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party with the thorny issue of the Irish border at the top of the agenda. Arlene Foster took an uncompromising stance, saying Northern Ireland should not be treated differently to the rest of the UK. Our Europe editor Matt Fry was there.
No, they're not rushing to lunch or looking for a friend. They're surely in search of the Holy Grail, with the Brexit clock ticking. And these days, the Holy Grail is still what happens to the border on the island of Ireland. Arlene Foster, on the right, leader of the DUP, is here less to help search for that elusive grail and more to remind Michel Barnier and everyone else where it cannot be found, in a suggested compromise that sees goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland inspected on the Irish Sea, but not the other way round. The whole Brexit deal hinges on her answer to this proposal, and we got it just after the meeting.
There cannot be any customs or regulatory barriers between ourselves and the rest of the United Kingdom, both ways, and I want to be very clear about that.
We've only got 6 or 7 days before the crucial summit here in Brussels. All eyes, Arlene Foster, are on you and your preparedness to make some sort of compromise regarding your red lines that could usher in a deal, a historic deal. Are you prepared to see that deal go up in smoke because of your red lines?
Well, I don't think I would look at it in that respect. I look at the fact that I'm the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. The clue's in the title. I am a unionist. I believe in the union of the United Kingdom, all 4 elements of the United Kingdom, and therefore I need to protect that, not just when we leave the European Union, because of course the day after we leave the European Union we will be aligned in terms of the whole of the UK, but what happens in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? We do not want Northern Ireland going off in a different direction from the rest of the UK, and that to me is fundamental, and that's why we need to see the text. We need to see what is being
But isn't that
proposed.
astonishing? You have not seen a text.
Well,
you are an integral part of the British government.
Well,
You should have been seen a text by now.
I'm not part of the government.
But you are keeping the government afloat.
Well, again, that's quite a pejorative use of language. We are acting.
I think it's a compliment. Actually.
We are acting in the national interest, and when the government, who are negotiating around all of these matters, and as they should do, when the government comes forward with the text, then we will assess that, and I would assume that that will come very quickly.
Back to that search, and Sinn Féin's McCarthy thinks that he's found the Holy Grail.
The compromise that we've put forward is for special status for the North, so that the North remains constitutionally part of the UK until we convince a majority of people there that their best interests lie in a united Ireland.
That's never going to happen. The DUP have said no way.
And in the meantime, we put in place the structures by which, while the constitutional status doesn't change until a majority decide otherwise, in the interim, that the North remains part of those EU areas of policy that are crucial to the economic, political and social development. Everybody wins out of that.
They really don't care about that Grail, but they may remember that it was the Good Friday Agreement which allowed them to chew grass on both sides of the border, and that was the Holy Grail of its day, apparently impossible until it became possible. And so the whole future of Brexit, to some extent of the European Union's relationship with Britain, hinges on the question of what happens on the island of Ireland.
That is an extraordinary position, as you put it. But isn't it right that it should hinge on this issue? Because we've had peace on the island of Ireland for 20 years. It's a very short period of time. I grew up in that violent time. My children have never seen this. And therefore, the European Union, a peace project at its very origins, understands, respects and values the peace on the island of Ireland and will do everything peacefully to make sure it is preserved.
Look, there is a lot of frustration here when you talk to senior EU officials about the position of the DUP, their public position, that they are sticking to their red lines that Arlene Foster described as blood red only last week. There's also a lot of frustration with, for instance, the speech that Jeremy Hunt gave at the Tory party conference. No shortage of frustrations. At the same time, the officials here are in what they call the tunnel, the final tunnel of negotiations. And I have to say, I've spoken to quite a few of them at the most senior level in the last 2 days, and they have said that actually the working environment has never been better. So this is a crunch week. This is the most important week perhaps that we've ever had for Brexit negotiations because of that summit next week. It is just possible that in the darkest hour, dawn might be in the offing. Back to you.
Matt, thanks very much. Well, Theresa May has faced another challenge to her Chequers Brexit plan after a cabinet minister refused to specifically back the proposal. Penny Mordaunt, the International Development Secretary and a prominent backer of the Leave campaign, said the Prime Minister could count on her support, but she didn't know where the process would end up. This afternoon, the Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab updated MPs on the state of negotiations. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. So, Gary, what are we learning about what the Cabinet thinks about Theresa May's Brexit plans?
Good and bad omens for Theresa May on that front. Dominic Raab in the House of Commons just a short while ago, new addition to the Cabinet, relatively new Brexit Secretary, comes from the Brexit wing of the party, turned round and appeared to sort of slap down people who would have been considered his old allies. Pro-Brexit backbenchers who don't like the Prime Minister's approach have been saying we've got to move away from that approach, too close to the EU institutions, to a free trade agreement approach. He turned round and said that is a shortcut to no deal. There was a bit of an intake of breath from a few people there, and some quiet inward cheering, I think, from people close to Theresa May. But the other indicator in the other direction was Penny Mordaunt, International Development Secretary. People have been chasing her down to try and get her to say she does back the Prime Minister for some time. She hasn't really done it. Today she was on a stage after giving a speech taking questions, and people did get an opportunity to try to pin her down. Would she give full support to the Prime Minister through this entire process of Brexit? The answer's not supposed to have a giant caveat or but in it when you're a Secretary of State. Here's how Penny Mordaunt answered the question.
Well, the Prime Minister can count on my support, but what I would say is that we don't know where this is going to end up. I mean, we're at a critical moment now.
Well, as you could hear, giant caveat there. The Cabinet meets next week. It met today but didn't discuss Brexit. Meeting next week to discuss Brexit. There'll be other key meetings ahead. Other bad omens for Theresa May, perhaps DUP MPs being quite menacing in the House of Commons, and that group that Dominic Raab was slapping down, saying they reckon they've got about 40 MPs ready to vote against Theresa May's deal.
Thanks very much, Gary.
It really is getting hard now to see what kind of Brexit deal Britain is actually going to get. The leader of the Democratic Unionists, the Prime Minister's key Commons allies, of course, Arlene Foster, tried to close down one possible option still open to the Prime Minister today. Mrs Foster said she and her fellow MPs would veto any deal that involved customs checks on goods moving between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK at the ferry terminals between Belfast and the mainland, for example. Her message wasn't just for Theresa May, of course, it was for the European Union too.
DUP leader Arlene Foster's meeting with the EU's chief negotiator Michel Barnier in Brussels today lasted twice as long as expected. The time it takes, presumably, to double down on what she calls her blood-red lines. It's clear she's in no mood for compromising on possible ways through the thorny Irish border issue. Are you prepared to veto a deal and bring in a no-deal Brexit?
We've always said that there's only one red line in these matters, and that's when we are treated differently from the rest of the United Kingdom in terms of customs, in terms of regulatory alignment, and that's to protect not just the constitution of the United Kingdom, but also the economy of Northern Ireland, which of course is vital from where I sit.
And despite being the leader of a party that props up Theresa May's government, she revealed that she hasn't seen the text of new Downing Street proposals designed to unpick the deadlock over the Irish border backstop.
What we need to see is the legal text, because we can't talk in a vacuum. We need to see what is being proposed.
The Irish border issue remains the biggest barrier to a Brexit deal, because if there's no eventual trade deal with the UK, the EU wants a backstop, an insurance policy to avoid goods getting into its single market. The EU's solution: just keep Northern Ireland inside the single market, removing the need for border checks, but requiring customs controls between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That breaks the DUP's red line. The UK government is expected to reveal fresh proposals soon, which will include keeping the entire UK in the EU customs union for a time-limited period. There are so many moving parts in these Brexit negotiations. The vast EU institutions like the European Parliament, for example. But the DUP, a political party from Northern Ireland, has just as much influence. The power to block a deal and even to bring down the UK government. But eventually the DUP will compromise, according to one leading Irish MEP.
I do not believe for one moment that Arlene Foster and the DUP can go back to Northern Ireland and say that a no deal is better than what might be on the table if we compromise and negotiate.
But for now, she's not budging. And with time running out, the chances of getting any deal may soon be blocked. Angus Walker, News at 10, Brussels.
And Robert is here, of course, to talk about all this. In fact, we haven't been had a chance because you've been on your phone to someone who's got some hot news for you.
Yes, so I have been told that in talks between Ollie Robbins, who's the lead negotiator for the UK among our civil servants, and Michel Barnier, who's the EU's chief negotiator, that progress has been made on this really crucial issue of how to keep the Northern Ireland border with the Republic of Ireland open until the details of a future relationship are settled. Now, what I am told is they've got a sort of, I wouldn't say a complete agreement, but they're moving towards a system where we would remain, and this is something that the British government has been mooting, within the customs area, the customs union, which would mean there wouldn't have to be customs checks between Northern Ireland and the Republic, and there would be minimal sea checks on goods going between the mainland of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, I think the way they're getting around DUP opposition here is I think they're saying the volume of those checks wouldn't increase. Now, it remains to be seen whether the DUP, which is propping up the government, would accept that. Now, the really, really contentious issue here is whether there is an end date to this backstop. All right? Dominic Raab, Brexit Secretary, said in the House of Commons today there has to be an end date, because otherwise it looks as though the UK effectively stays as a non-voting member of the EU forever if we don't manage to negotiate a future relationship.
And he is no backstop.
And he has been, the EU's position is there has to be a no end date, because the whole point about insurance policies is they're there to insure against an event that you can't predict. Now, I am also told there are some sort of weasel words that are bringing the two sides together. This is breaking news. There has obviously been a bit of progress. I'd be surprised if, this is really the end of the matter and we've really got a deal on this crucial issue. But, let's look on the bright side and hope that there really is movement in a positive direction.
Always look on the bright side of life. I think it's the motto of our discussions on this programme. If you want to, Robert will no doubt be blogging, so...
I will in the course of the evening when I've got a bit more information.
Do follow him if you want to know more.